As I was saying, my name is Molly and I'm the host for this session. It is the last session for EduTech Africa 2020. I'd like to please invite my speakers to not do what I did and unmute themselves and turn their cameras on. I'm sorry to do this, ladies, but it's because of the blonde hair. But this is where I can guarantee the audience doesn't want to hear from me. They'd rather hear from you guys. So I'm going to hand over to Tessa. Have a good one.
Thank you. Thanks, Molly. Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Tessa Cooper, and I work for BrightSparkz Tutors, a company that's been in the learning support industry since the early 2000s. Today, we'll be tackling the topic Beyond the Classroom, how to support learners and their parents through changes and challenging times in education. Over the past few days, this event has given us the opportunity to explore various support mechanisms within the South African education system. This type of support is more important now than ever before, with all learners having had their educations interrupted due to COVID-19. There are numerous ways to support learners and their parents through challenges and changes to their education. Some of our audience may be familiar with some of these, such as tutoring or homeschooling, while others may be less familiar, such as a brief overview of who they are and what viewpoint they're entering this conversation from. So to start off with, we have Dominique Schwen, the director of BrightSparkz Tutors. Dominique, you're on mute.
Hi, Tessa. Thank you. Sorry about that. Orientating myself here. It's great to be here. Hey, Tessa, I'm back.
Oh, great. Okay, so if you would just give us a brief overview of your viewpoint into this topic.
Oh, sure. So, yeah, I think the viewpoint and the stance that I'll be taking today is really speaking on behalf of how or feedback and interaction we've had with clients and learners. So clients being mostly parents of kids in both primary and high school, as well as university level. And yeah, so we'll be speaking, I guess, from that perspective of what parents have told us about in terms of challenges and how they've navigated COVID, and then also, I guess, what kind of support we offer, but in general, speaking more broadly in terms of what learning support there is out there and what parents can do to support themselves and to support their children.
Okay, thank you. And I'm next on sort of my screen, Juan Pfister, the Regional Director for Sub-Saharan Africa, Cambridge Assessment International Education.
Thank you very much, Tessa, and welcome everybody. Great to be here this afternoon. I think from our perspective, Cambridge offers school exams from 5 years through to 19 years in 160 countries globally. We don't manage schools directly. We accredit them to offer our curricula, and then they offer the curriculum and then present themselves for examinations. Probably we're best known for IGCSEs, A-levels. These are recognized by universities globally. In South Africa directly, combinations of Cambridge subjects will get a learner into university. Certainly challenging times. Also be useful to get the perspective as well as give my perspective of how COVID has forced changes on Cambridge assessment and schools and how people assist people coping, and also where we see the world of schooling going 2021 and beyond. Back to you, Tessa.
Fantastic, thank you. And finally, Nan Lutz, the Director of Mindfulness Africa.
Hi, Tessa, thank you, and hello to everyone out there. So from a mindfulness perspective, which during COVID has become quite popular, it's this aspect of just coping with change, you know, routines are changed, so much has changed. how do people actually cope with additional responsibilities of, in some cases, having learners at home, and still see to their own responsibilities. So I'll be talking from a mindfulness perspective, and sharing, you know, what's possible, maybe some tips depending on our timing and what support and resources are out there. Thanks, Tessa.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So just before we start, if any of the audience has any questions for our panelists, please do use the chat function to send them through, and we'll try to get through as many as we can before the end of this session. So to start us off, 2020 has been a year of great change in education. From your experience, what have been the biggest challenges for parents and learners during COVID? And how have these changed compared to before COVID? Dominique, if you'd like to start.
Sure, thanks, Tessa. So I think everything's changed. So much has changed. We can't really, I mean, thinking about this question, the challenges that we've been, or parents and learners have been sharing with us is completely different to what it would have if COVID hadn't happened. So there's been massive shifts. I think three challenges really stand out above everything else. Firstly, parents having to juggle a new routine, complete disruption to the home life environment, just juggling taking up three roles. So being an employee, being an educator at home or supervising education at home, and then also still being a parent. So I think that's been a really big challenge for most parents. And the second thing is being able to afford extra support or say child supervision or tutoring or pairs when they are still paying for school fees and there are still financial obligations on that end. And that's been a very big challenge for many parents. And then thirdly, I think for learners, just that very quick, sudden jump and adaptation to online schooling has been quite a big a challenge for them. I think some learners have really excelled and are thriving in that sort of format, if the school offers that format, and other learners have really struggled with that and with that adjustment.
So Juan, you're sort of on the other side of the spectrum here in that a lot of your students are working independently a lot of the time. So how has that change been for you?
Well, most of Cambridge learners are actually in schools in the traditional sense, but with the COVID lockdowns in, I'd say probably about 99% of the countries, you suddenly had families and learners working under the same roof. Parents suddenly had to become principals in their own schools and try and prepare learners towards summative exams. The Cambridge pathway is really two sections. Primary and lower secondary is designed to be offered within schools. So that's a bit more challenging. The schools had to learn an overnight capability of being able to offer assessments and support online. So it was almost like building a plane and flying it at the same time. So this had to happen very quickly. In the older grades, our upper secondary and advanced programs, those have summative exams at the end of them. So it was continuing to prepare learners. And you tend to find that's quite tough in a homeschooling environment, because normally by around about grade 10, homeschool children or parents trying to school children at home will start running out of knowledge and then have to find ways of supplementing that, for instance, using online or also as far as textbooks go. We're pleased that most of the schools have been able to get going again. I do understand many of the government schools, for example, my one niece, she's one day in school and then next day out, then back and in and out. And I think they initially tried 1 week in and then 1 week off, which I think was a bit long. But I think that's probably been biggest challenge, parents being principals of their own schools. The dynamic between parents and children is simply different to that which you'd find at the school. So you might get a lot more arguments, and that doesn't sit too well at home. It's good to remember that teachers are very specialized professionals. They've taken many years to get there. So in a nutshell, I think it's been a dramatic change, people suddenly working from home. And also it's a very, very scary environment. You know, people walking around outside with masks. We're all starring in a very bad B-grade science fiction movie at the moment. And I think the impact on that cannot be underestimated. And it's not only on the children and the parents, but teachers are sitting with that as well. So it's been a very scary year, and certainly hope 2021 will be somewhat less challenging. Back to you, Tessa.
Fingers crossed. So Nan, that seems like a very good point for you to jump in from a mindfulness perspective, in terms of what your clients and the people you've been interacting with have been facing and experiencing.
So maybe just from a mindfulness perspective, you know, part of mindfulness is the attitude and the attitude that we bring to ourselves and to life. So, you know, we can look at change, and there's change has always been around. Change is nothing new. You know, whether you're looking at generations with pandemics in the past, or world wars, or depression, financial depressions in countries, change has always been there. So if we can get a bigger picture on this change, and take the attitude, you know, that we can step into it, and that not everything is disastrous. Yes, it is, you know, a B-grade science fiction movie, but there's also opportunities in there. And, you know, we have wonderful examples of people showing incredible humanity and stepping into this role. And, you know, there are examples, working remotely, how people are benefiting from this. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that there is change, that there always has been change, and change is nothing new. And so as a life skill, both for parents and for learners, is to be able to bring this view into themselves so they can develop the skills for resilience and coping. So no matter what life's daily changes or broader changes within the economy, the education system, within our country happens, that we have an ability to be able to find our way through this. So I think that the changes have maybe been more intense, and certainly, as Dominique was saying, you know, even those who are able to cope with routines have perhaps had financial challenges, and not just for parents, but for learners as well, this adaptation. But what we take out of this can be beneficial for the rest of our lives. So, you know, let's just keep a balanced view on change and what change is and how we can work with it. Thanks, Tessa.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. So facing all of this change and looking at previous situations where we've had to deal with challenging situations in education system or outside of it for parents and learners, and how can parents utilize all of these resources to best support their child? Maybe we can start off with a recap of what learning support services there are.
Sure, thanks, Tessa. Yeah, I think it's important we talk about learning support, but it's important to unpack what that really is outside of the classroom. And I think there's so many different ways or so many different shapes and forms it can take. I mean, a parent can provide learning support, but then there are also other people that can provide learning support and other resources, I think it's always important to have what I call your own human resource department. So whether it's family, friends, or you've hired support, perhaps, for example, in the form of a tutor or a or pair, and just to unpack a bit more about tutoring, it's really there to supplement learning at school. So it's not there to replace the teacher or to replace the learning and the work that takes place in a school environment. But we do understand that parents do often don't have the time or perhaps the expertise. Juan mentioned that from grade 10 up, work starts getting a lot harder. Math starts becoming more foreign and more of a foreign language, and also patience. Again, he also mentioned the family dynamic, and it's very difficult for parents to assist academically, assist their learners or their children. Sorry. So having that outside support is really important, and then it can take some other forms as well. There are learners who experience learning barriers. They can also apply for a special concession, and that's usually facilitated by the school itself. And then they would be able to access a reader or scribe. So that's a bit more of a specialized type of learning support for a learner that is experiencing a learning barrier. And then, of course, the school offers resources often, and there are other kinds of support systems out there, but I'll let Nan and Juan jump onto that. Thanks, Tessa.
Thanks. I'll jump in over there. If you take into account how sudden it turned up, I mean, if you think about it, end of 2019, everything seemed was just going to be a great year. 2020's got a fantastic ring to it. And then this happened. The Cambridge machine had to quickly jump into action to deliver support to our schools, especially as many of them were in countries where lockdown was taking place. We always make quite a lot of information available, especially at the higher grades, on our public website. So it's a great support facility, hence why it's often used by homeschoolers. But we even added more, and this support is available outside of Cambridge schools. So anybody can go on board. We got, for example, instructional videos, tips for teaching, tips for learning, particularly now getting back to school, and how do you get back into learning. So helping the schools and our educators. We also, for example, used to have face-to-face teacher training. This has now been swapped into an online teacher training, which I think is better value for money, because the teachers actually almost run a short course. So it's not the normal 2-day face-to-face. And we've also got one of our latest additions to the Cambridge family is a group called CHEM, the Center for Evaluation and Monitoring. Now, these are diagnostic tests that schools can sign up for, particularly to understand where the learner is at when they get back to school. So you need to understand the gaps. So that's one of the big areas of advice I would put out, particularly at our upper secondary and advanced levels. There are free past papers on the Cambridge website. So it's useful to get learners to actually sit those exam papers to see how far they are behind. We also had a massive challenge. A June series is our largest one, delivers about 70% of the Cambridge exams, because we run exams in this part of the world twice per year. And June series had to become assessed grades because it's just not possible to sit exams. So even there, it was also like flying a plane and building it at the same time. So Cambridge schools also had to quickly set up virtual online platforms. And again, on the website, there's advice how to do that. We also had guides for emotional well-being for schools, as well as learners at the schools. Some of our partners, Cambridge University Press, also made e-textbooks available on the 90-day trial available to the schools. We've had a series of webinars during the pandemic and also allowing schools to get back to learning. So it has been something That's taken quite an effort. I think staff are working now harder than ever, but a lot of the information on the Cambridge website, if you'd like to find out more, it's very easy to find us on the internet. Back to you, Tessa.
Thank you, Juan. You mentioned the gaps in the knowledge that might be present in learners at this point. And I think one of the gaps in learning supports in particular is that aspect of mental health and the role that it plays in a child's education. So Nan, what is your sort of experience of the support that is available from a mental health perspective?
So, I mean, in terms of learners, the best support is the modeling of parents. You know, learners will pick up whatever is happening with the parents. So, you know, there's certain techniques, but there's also this aspect that I spoke about earlier about attitude. So if the attitude of the parents is around, this is stressful, I'm not coping, it's bad, you know, then that kind of stress and the associated hormones, the adrenaline, the cortisol, is going to affect not only the parent, but the entire learning system of the family, the friends, and the learner itself. So the parents are generally the adults here, and so it's really important that they can have some sort of a balanced view about this, and to model coping and resilience. So, you know, coping and resilience, it's not rocket science that we're working with here. Someone mentioned earlier this aspect of patience. So just being patient, being kind, an aspect of listening deeply to the learners can help enormously. And as I say, the modeling of that. Resources are within us. We know a lot of them already. It's just perhaps taking a little bit of time to be aware of this. And this is where the mindfulness training comes in, as it helps us to be aware. So being able to check in with yourself on a regular basis in the day, to bring this awareness, and to be present to the learner so that they do feel heard and they're not just part of a whirlwind of stress and chaos and doom and gloom. So in terms of resources available, I would say, you know, firstly, just check into your own inner resources that are there, your own wisdom, whether it's from your grandmother or, you know, the internet is there, online teaching is there. There's so much available on the internet, but for those that don't want to go onto the internet or perhaps feel, you know, there isn't time to do more of that, it's just about checking into their own well-being and their own inner wisdom, perhaps. Thanks, Tessa. I could perhaps just say as well that in terms of online resources, there are a lot of mindfulness courses, or there's talks, or there's workshops, and, you know, for those that are not in complete lockdown, retreats are starting to happen again, in-person workshops, coaching, one-on-one facilitations, and sometimes just a discussion about, you know, accessing your own inner resources or wisdom can be a great way just to start the process, and then to link that in with maybe more specialized tutoring and coaching. So, you know, this idea that you have to get everything from somewhere else is not true. There's a lot within us that we can access. If our view is just that one of, you know, that very simple aspect of, let me take a deep breath. You know, as simple as taking a deep breath or a few deep breaths. And there's some, there's some wonderful apps that exist. So, whether you're on the internet or whether you're on Facebook, wherever you are, you can access some of these resources, and very short. It doesn't have to be long as well.
Just to jump on to what you're saying, Anna.
Apologies, everyone. So I was facing one of the challenges of COVID and education at that time with a loss in my internet connectivity there. Not sure if everyone can hear me again.
Yeah, we can hear you. Thanks. I just wanted to jump onto what Nan was saying about tapping into those resources. I think it's probably one of the biggest challenges for parents has been time. And where do you find the time to carve out time for yourself to be able to tap into that, refuel your tank, so to speak, when you're juggling all those responsibilities of being an employee, an educator, and a parent at the same time. So I think that's something challenging, but yet I think something really important for parents to do or to find, whether it's, even if it's 5 minutes, it's just to yourself. But I know that's a really big challenge.
And maybe just to, if I could just, link onto that, Dominique, is that sometimes it's not even time, it's simply an attitude that we bring to ourselves. So if we have this attitude, that I'm doing my best, I'm going to get through this, and I'm going to create a little bit of space, I'm going to take some deep breaths, I'm going to do this together with the learners, that doesn't necessarily mean taking a whole day out for yourself. Ideally, to do all of them, but there's stuff that you can do moment by moment, just by changing the attitude and how we view what's happening, as opposed to taking an attitude of, I don't have any resources, I don't have any skills, I don't have any abilities, so it's glass half full versus half empty. So, that can help as well.
I think Juan wanted to mention something.
Just to say, what's very important is to keep to a routine. Build that into your day. So, for example, keep the weekends open. Get up at a standard time. Get the family ready. You get on with your work. Let them work on schoolwork. Take regular breaks. Rather than, otherwise you find one day just morphs into the next. So all I could say is try and establish a routine that gives you a bit of sense of purpose. When it gets to a certain time of the evening, call it a day and take it on the following day. Just a point.
And that should be quite a sort of a flexible routine, right? Like not too rigid, because things do change, and I think sometimes it's good to have a bit more flexibility in that routine.
Yeah, I mean, routines help us develop habits. And so, linking things to routines. So that's a good way just to be mindful and be aware during the day, as I said, without having to take an hour off or fit in, an extra hour into your day or anything like that. So this ability to just link things to routine. So, just being aware before you start eating, just taking a few deep breaths, just pausing. This ability to just pause, instead of just being carried away by this absolute rapid downstream of disaster and chaos, and living your life from that point of view. So yeah, routines are great. I support that one. Thanks, Tessa.
So on the topic of routines, one of the big routine changes that a lot of parents have either been facing or have actually actioned for themselves is that decision on whether or not to switch to homeschooling. So what advice would you give to a parent who is considering homeschooling? What factors need to be considered in this decision making, and how should parents be making a decision?
Dominique, would you like to start, or would you like me to kick off?
Well, you're welcome to kick off. I'll jump on the
100%. Maybe
the
just a few general points. Because of the nature of the Cambridge curriculum and because it's offered in so many countries, we do have a lot of homeschoolers taking Cambridge in order to be able to advance their schooling, and also it's widely accepted in many universities globally. So, but just to mention in general, coming back to South Africa, is that all schools that offer Cambridge have to be first registered with their Department of Education. And parents should also know, if you want to move your child to become a homeschooler, you need to also register said child with the DOE. So very important to know that. As mentioned, the Cambridge pathway, the primary and the lower secondary area till about year 14 is designed to be taught in schools. So most of the lessons, the progression tests and the support to that school that signed up for that program is enclosed within almost, if you think a jar, that which goes to the school. You'll find very little of that in the public domain or on our public website, for example. The upper secondary, so everything from approximately grade 10 up to grade 13, you will find significant, you'll find these syllabi, even learning guides, etc., etc. And that's very useful for learners that are going into homeschooling. And it helps because there is a summative exam at the end of that process. So if the learners learned, they'll do well in the exam. So also just to bear in mind that the impact of having to work from home every day has had on you. This is basically the same for a learner that's going to become a homeschooler. And I know many people have expressed they can't wait to actually get back to an office sometimes to see real people face to face. So bear in mind that you might want to look at some type of blended approach. And if the learner is going to be homeschooled, do ensure that they get some degree of socialization. This doesn't have to happen in a school, but you make sure they're involved in sports clubs, etc. So do keep an eye on that, because it's a very, very important aspect of learners' lives. We learn a lot of our socialization techniques within schools. As mentioned, you probably are going to need help at some point in time with the curricula because it's so varied and you need specialist support. So do check out any online provider very, very cautiously. Make sure that they deliver what they promise, and especially around cyber safety. So for example, if I'm having a one-on-one chat with a learner, this should be recorded and the parents should be able to see that. So keep a very close eye on that. Cambridge also has had to move very, very quickly in this sphere, with many of our schools having to build up online capability. So although we have no registered school at the moment in South Africa offering online, a formally registered Cambridge school, keep an eye on that space. I see changes coming there in 2021. And just a few other things. I spoke about normal routine, and again, socialization, I spoke about that, and do keep a very close eye on the promises made by any provider and make sure that they deliver. You're more than welcome, if you're not sure about anybody, to contact the local Cambridge office. Again, our details are on the website if you want to check out the bona fides of any provider. More than welcome to do that. Dominica.
Thanks, Juan. Yeah, I know that I can testify to Cambridge resources. We send many of our tutors that direction when they're needing Cambridge, when they're assisting Cambridge learners. They have really, really fantastic resources. And we've seen a lot of actually learners who are on Cambridge programs who really, really do well on there. Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting topic because, you know, over the past 10 years or so, we've seen waves of parents phone us and call us and see us and ask, you know, they're thinking of homeschooling, they're wanting to take their child out of school. And I think previously we picked up a lot of it, or the motivation was largely maybe social challenges, child not fitting into the school environment, perhaps some bullying. But that's definitely shifted now, where I think having learners learn at home, parents are realizing, well, it's doable. There maybe are some benefits. A lot of parents have seen that the pace has changed. Their child is not so trying to fit in so many extracurricular activities. So there's definitely been an uptake in interest again. And I think luckily for parents, now there's so much more support available for homeschoolers. There's, you know, the Homeschool Association, the Department of Education have a lot of information on, you know, what a parent needs to do as well. So the support is much better than it was 10 or 8 years ago even. So I think it is important. What we've seen in the past is, you know, learners need firstly structure. If they don't have a structure, or they aren't very structured, it's going to be difficult. I'm just thinking back to a tutor many years ago who was assisting a teenage gentleman, and she actually arrived at his house, and I think he was still asleep, and opened the door in his underwear. He'd been playing games like too long at night, so for too long. So that was just something obviously that we found quite funny, but it definitely needs to have there needs to be a structure. And where it works really well is when it's learner driven. If the learner themselves has initiated that or asked that they could be homeschooled. This is typically with high school learners, you know, grade 10, 11 up, where they feel that they would be better in a homeschool environment, or they prefer working from home with having a smaller group of peers or contacts or friends that they engage with. So I think that's really also, it works really well if it's learner driven. Having a good curriculum, as Juan mentioned, that's really, really important. Picking the right curriculum, and there's quite a few good ones. Cambridge is great. And then of course support. You know, you need to have your human resource department set up. So your homeschool community, people you can talk to who are also homeschooling. There are communities out there. So speak to people before you even make that decision. I think that's really important. And having your tutors or your specialists that can also assist either online or in person. So that would be my advice. So it's a mouthful, but there it is.
And perhaps I can come in here. I just wanted to pick up on the point that both Juan and Dominique, you made about socializing. And I see that we have a question about, you know, we are social animals, and, you know, how can parents teach children social norms during this time? So, you know, I just wanted to talk to that and say, firstly, as you were saying, Dominique, you know, in terms of homeschooling, there are benefits to it. Many learners learn at a better pace at their own time. And so, you know, not to see the one system as good and the other as bad, but to come back to your point about if it's learner driven and really what's going to be able to support the learners. In terms of socializing the learners, well, the family is a social system. And, you know, unless you're in complete hard lockdown like we were, in which case you do have technology to be able to socialize, again, you know, the learners are going to learn whatever the parents are modeling. So in terms of social behaviors, in terms of socially connecting, in terms of what's norm, you know, there's a wonderful opportunity here for parents to really set the kind of values and morals that they want for their own children, for their learners, as opposed to delegating that to a school that maybe doesn't have that kind of resource or that kind of vested interest in that individual. So, you know, whether it's simply taking a walk around the garden or growing vegetables, you know, at home. Things like that are small things that can help around social norms. It doesn't have to be in person playing with another child to socialize your own learners.
I think overall, from the perspective that we would have and dealing with in excess of 10,000 schools globally, probably the best place for a learner to get educated in is a school. And as I said, particularly at the lower grades, from about 14 years and under, certainly what we deem as primary school within South Africa, for many reasons. There are very many good reasons why a learner may not be suited to that environment. I think we touched on that, bullying, for example. And I think it's very important, if you're deciding to go that route, or if you are homeschooling children, to do some introspection and try and understand what the main reasons are. Financially, it's not going to be particularly cheaper, especially because, as mentioned, you are going to need other services, and also in terms of time and effort and ensuring you become the principal of that school. So do you have a good session as a family and try and understand why you want to take this route, and if need be, get professional guidance. Go and see a good guidance counselor that can give you some insight, and maybe look, if it's an issue like the learner's been bullied, that's maybe something totally different. And I mean, the issue is probably then with the school. It's something that we definitely need to stamp out. I have seen some wonderful homeschooled children results, outstanding learners. We have outstanding learners in certain countries globally where there's enough critical mass, and every single session we get them in South Africa. That means they are top performers, and that's going against some of the really big name schools. So you can do very well, and you do get sometimes on the opposite end of the spectrum where the learner is actually bogged down being at school, and they move far quicker. Some of our schools offer a grade 13 program, which means that the learner actually goes on to post-matric. In some countries, grade 13 is the grade that they leave. So in Ghana, for example, they can often get credit for year one at university. So a number of schools are increasingly so, especially if you want to get your child into high stakes faculty. It's important sometimes having that extra year. And very, very importantly, we can get the document to you on the public website. If you go in the Cambridge route, make sure that your subject combinations, if you're planning that your child goes into higher education, is correct. That you don't land up finding that they would like to go and study medicine one day, but they've done geography, history, and economics, none of these sciences. So very, very important that you understand which academic route, and again, their professionals are able to guide and say, but you know, they probably need to be, they may be best placed in something else. So again, there, certain of the tutor services can be very, very useful, but as mentioned early on, do choose them very wisely. Back to you, Tessa.
Thanks so much. So there's a lot of important points there that I think parents need to be considering when they are looking at homeschool. But outside of looking at homeschool, what is one practical strategy that a parent can implement in order to support themselves so that they can better support their children? Nan, do you want to start?
Yeah, so, you know, often it's something that perhaps your grandmother has taught you to say, you know, just take a deep breath, count to 10. You know, and I'm sure as I say it, it kind of brings a smile to your face anyway. But this, I just wanted to talk about this ability to pause. You know, there's a very easy acronym, STOP, S-T-O-P. And, you know, the first part of that, the S, is just to stop, you know, take a deep breath, open to what's going on and pause. This ability to pause in our own lives, in the lives of the world, your family, social system, is such an easy resource that's available to us, that's there. It's just remembering to do this. And in fact, mindfulness in some languages is actually called remembering. So, you know, whether it's linking to a routine and just taking time to take a deep breath, take a pause, just to maybe be grateful, to notice something around you, to bring yourself in that present moment. But just, you know, the one thing that I want to hang and to put out there for people is this ability to pause. Thank you.
Thanks, Nan. It's always so difficult to find one thing. I think, if I may, I'll sort of have one that flows into a second thing. But I think the first thing really is to set realistic expectations for yourself, you know, as a parent. If you're a parent out there that's having to juggle being an employee, an educator now, you know, on and off as your child goes back to school, perhaps is at home still, and also being a parent, I think we should just sort of throw out the expectation that all our ducks need to be in a row. And if the ducks are somewhere wandering within 100 meters of the pond, you know, you're doing well. You're doing okay. So I think that's important, just to have realistic expectations. And I think the one tip would be probably to ask, embark on a question session with your child. You know, ask them why they do certain things, ask them why they're curious about certain things. I think what I've picked up through this conference is, you know, there's so much content out there. Content is really available, and typically in schools we try to push as much content down our children's throats as possible, but we don't always teach them the process of learning, the process of thinking. I know Cambridge do that actually very well in terms of how to teach critical thinking. But so I think that's something, just ask questions, ask your child why they're doing certain things, because learning can take place in so many different ways. It doesn't have to take place by spending 2 hours completing a worksheet. So that would be my tip, and trying to think of more the outcome rather than the time that's spent on something.
Thanks very much, Dominique. You reminded me of the point one of our school heads said, that the Cambridge curriculum, you get 50% for knowing the work, the other 50% is applying it. And especially being able to take information from various subjects. If you think about it, many of us only picked up that skill far later in life. It would have been very useful to have gone into university knowing that economics talks to geography and geography talks to science, to be able to apply that. But I think the one point comes back to Nan's mindfulness is really that there are teachers all around us, and be aware and try and find them. I know one of my former colleagues said when they didn't have a mentor, they had books. So maybe going back to some of the, dust them off the shelf, put away those tablets, and let's actually do some reading. And then on the other hand, you know, what's available on the internet is incredible. So use that, but maybe look out for your teachers. They are all around you.
Yeah, I think just on Juan's point about reading, a friend of mine who's a grade 5 teacher said, you know, her tip for parents is, if nothing else, just try and get your children to keep reading, because that will overflow into various areas of their academic space.
Yeah, and maybe just to add on to that, you know, this as one, as you were saying, you know, this idea that you kind of have to stuff the children full of academic and content, you know, if we can just balance that with how do we help this learner, you know, become a responsible human being, and just to access the resources around them so that they have the skills and the coping methodologies, and then they will be able to learn based on that and learn throughout their lives, not just, you know, for one assessment or one exam. So again, that bigger picture of, you know, how do you really assist and model being, you know, a really kind human being.
Fantastic, thank you. So just to let the audience know, we are running out of time. So if you do have any questions, now is the time to please send them through to us. But while we wait for any questions that our audience may have, I'm going to hit you guys with another one question. So what is one way, because we're running out of time, that you see learning support changing in the next few years? And how do you see technology playing a role in this change? One, I'll ask you to start.
We've seen it in the last few months. You know, projects that we were planning within Cambridge around virtual schooling and online has suddenly, that might have taken another 3 to 4 years, was suddenly accelerated into a couple of months to get them ready. And also, I think the same thing has happened with the schools. So I see technology playing a far bigger role. I see this type of modality also coming into play because I look after such a big area and a relatively small team. We can now actually touch base with far more schools simply by using MS Teams, and it doesn't feel a million miles off. It's far better than a phone call. So embrace that. I can see that changing dramatically, and also the patterns of how people work. One of the things within Cambridge that we're looking very closely at is, even with our registered schools, allowing more of a blended learning approach where you might have 50% in the class, 50% this type of modality. The socialization aspect is still there, but I think COVID's going to change things dramatically, and I think many of those will be better. We're going to see far more AI and this type of thing. So exciting times.
Yeah, I think Juan hit the nail on the head with the word accelerate. I mean, we at BrightSparkz have been offering online tutoring for, you know, over 8 years, and but yet I think now with COVID and lockdown, it just accelerated the progression towards that point. And it's been so interesting. So many learners, particularly in high school, prefer it. They feel it's less intimidating. It's they get a lot of value in terms of the engagement and content and interaction with their tutor online. So I think that's really going to shift dramatically. I think parents were maybe not ready for it, but the learners have been more than ready for some time now. So I think that's just going to become more and more, people are going to become more and more comfortable learning in that way and building relationship in that way.
I saw something the other day, 2 days back was another anniversary of me going around the sun on planet ship Earth, and in the note from one of the providers of services to me, they said, well, you've seen from typewriters to touch screens and from Bob Dylan to Bruno Mars. And my wife said, who's Bruno Mars? So we are going to see things shift very, very quickly. And I think also technology, it's been said that the pace of technological transformation has never been faster in human history. And it will never be this slow again.
That's an interesting one. Just to pick up on the technology aspect, I mean, you know, this idea of, in terms of mindfulness, of meditating online, you know, a few years ago seemed quite unusual and strange when you're used to being in person or sitting on a cushion or whatever. And now we're running global retreats online, you know, so people have access to resources and teachers and opportunities. So, you know, very often it's only our own viewpoint that limits us. You know, when we're talking to people who identify with Bruno Mars, and yet we've never heard of Bruno Mars. So I think it's important that we're open to this, and that we don't cast this judgment around, you know, that what technology is or isn't. It's here to stay, and it's the future. So it's about preparing those learners for the world and the next decade, the next century. Thanks, Tessa.
Well, it's true. The best teachers are those that never stop learning, and you learn from everybody. And as you said as well, it's now every opportunity gives you something to find out something new. And yeah, this piece of technology in front of me, it's just putting in the name and it'll throw something out. Even if I don't spell Bruno Mars correctly, it'll correct it for me, and I can play some of his music without paying a cent. So we live in fantastic times.
Something that one of the speakers earlier this week mentioned was really someone from a university, just talking about how it's important to go to the spaces that learners are in. And, you know, if learners on Facebook, if learners on WhatsApp, on Instagram, this is where they will interact with each other, learn from each other. And just something that we've seen over the past 6 months is learners actually wanting their tutoring over WhatsApp. So it'd be WhatsApp video or WhatsApp chat and video, or a combination. And you know, one thinks, okay, it's maybe not a professional platform, or it's not going to work, but it works, and they love it because that's where they are. So it was just interesting to have that perspective that we think something's not going to work, and the way we've done it for so long is it can inform our planning and how we adapt our services. But it's really important to be where the learners are, where the child is as well, and meet them where they're at in those spaces.
I saw a wonderful quote from someone that said, you know, if you don't have a mentor who is under 13 years old, you know, and this was in a business community, you know, then you really are not preparing for the future. So, you know, we can look at the learners as mentors, and
absolutely, that's
thanks,
a great
Tessa.
perspective.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. I think we do need to wrap up. It doesn't seem like we have any more questions, but if you are watching this now and you have a question, or you're watching it later and you have a question for the chat, and one of us will try to get back to you. And then just on that note, we all know that it takes a village to raise a child, and that's never been more true. Along with the advances made within the education system itself to make learning more individualized, there are numerous alternative forms of support that parents can utilize, including academic support, alternative education systems, and help in looking after your child's mental and emotional well-being. So parents, you have our support, and remember that you're more in control than you think. Thank you so much to all of our panelists and to our audience. And Molly, I will hand back to you.
Great, thank you guys. That was a very insightful panel. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'd like to take this time just to thank you on behalf of myself, on behalf of the EduTech team. We will definitely be in touch with you with regards to, number one, just thanking you and any other questions you may or may not have. But otherwise, have a good evening, and I look forward to working with you guys again soon.
Thanks, Molly.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.